Hey everybody, it's your good pal Warren A-Box here, coming to you live in the flesh for once. Before we kick off this little experiment, I'd like to thank all of my regulars for swinging by the blog, checking out my latest offerings, and also to any of you newcomers that are into hex and counter wargaming. We're going to be doing a live play here. Well, I guess it's not live, it's recorded. It's an actual play. And actual plays are a hit amongst the kids when it comes to video games, and they seem to have taken the Warhammer 40k world by storm. The other day I was poking around trying to find a few battle reports, and I couldn't find anything to read. All I could find were a lot of videos. On the other hand, I have never seen an actual play of a hex and counter war game, so I thought that might be a fun little thing to experiment with. Don't worry, if you're along for the ride, I'm going to edit out all of the boring bits, so you won't have to listen to me scratch my head and rub my chin as I fumble through the rules trying to figure out where that silly little exception is. The game that I have selected to kick things off with is a classic title. It's called Barbarian Prince. This was released in the early 1980s by a Dwarf Star Games. If you get a kick out of what you see here and you want to give Barbarian Prince a try, you can actually download all of the files for this game. That's what this is. I printed down this map and the tracking sheet, and give it a shot for yourself free of charge, save for the ink that it takes to print it up. I went a little more robust and mounted this on cereal packet, Honey Nut Cheerios. You don't have to use Honey Nut Cheerios, use your favorite brand. A couple of guys have redesigned the map. I'm not sure if this one is a little easier on the eyes in the video or not. It's one that I can sketch on and make any notes if I need to. You'll see why that becomes relevant later on. But for now, let's go ahead and stick with the classic Dwarf Star Games version of the artwork. This particular game is a solo war game. It's basically a jumped up choose your own adventure, but it's a little more complicated than even the old Steve Jackson Games. The old Steve Jackson Games choose your own adventure books. As you can see, you have a number of stats to take care of. I'm not going to go into all the rules right now. For now, all you really need to know is that you take on the role of Cal Arath, the Barbarian Prince. And in lieu of a counter, we're actually going to use this miniature. It's like 10mm Pendraken miniatures from their fantasy line. And as the adventure begins, evil events have overtaken your Northland kingdoms. Your father, the old king, is dead, assassinated by rivals to the throne. These usurpers now hold the palace with their mercenary royal guard. You have escaped, and you must collect 500 gold pieces to raise a force to smash them and retake your heritage. Furthermore, the usurpers have powerful friends overseas. You've only got 10 weeks. This is our time counter. You've got 70 days to collect 500 gold and return home, or you lose. So your starting attributes are, you've got a combat skill of 8, you've got 9 endurance, which basically amounts to hit points, and then you also have a starting wit. And your wit is determined randomly at the start of every game by rolling a d6. And this time around, poor old Cal only has a wit of 2. There are a number of different places where you can start out. You actually roll a d6 to find the exact hex. And a roll of 4 means you start in an empty hex, number 1301. So this little blue line here is the Tragoth River, and it essentially marks the southern boundary of the Northland kingdoms. If you end your actions north of that river, then the royal guards can find you. So the first thing we have to do is get over the Tragoth River. That means we're going to move. Now, you only get to move 1 hex per day until you find a horse. So I'm going to try to move to this hex right here. As you can see, that is a swamp hex. Every time you move, you got to check to see if you get lost. And to do that, you roll a 2d6. Now, in this case, since I'm leaving countryside, I only get lost on a 9 or greater. 8, so I didn't get lost. I'm also trying to cross a river, which means I have to check a second time, this time because I've entered the swamp. Now, on a swamp, you get lost on a 5 or greater. So I'm lost. That means I am stuck in this hex. I'm across the river, but I'm lost blundering about in the swamp. Thus ends the end. Oh, no, that doesn't end the end of my day. There's also a chance that something happens to me. Since I'm in the swamp, I got to find out if there's an event or not. To do that, you roll 2 dice. In this case, I need a 10 or higher. I rolled a 2, so that means no events. I bed down for the night. Unfortunately, as you can see, I have no food. That means starvation starts to kick in. The first day that you're starving, your combat skill goes down by 1. So For the time being, my combat skill is going to be 7. This is day 2. So let's put our counter on the right day. Thank you very much. So day 2, we are starving. We need food. So what we're going to do is we're going to hunt. Now, you can hunt to find food. The way you do that is to take the average of your combat and endurance. In this case, that's going to be 8. You roll 2d6. I got a 4. You subtract that from your average. I got 4 food. Now, that means I can eat for today, and the effects of starvation are ended. There's still a chance that something happens. So we got to roll for the swamp table, and on a 10 plus, something happens. I got a 5, nothing happens. I didn't move, but I'm still in the swamp. So I go down by 1 food, and now it's the 3rd day. And it's the 3rd day. Remember, I crossed the river, but I'm still technically in the swamp. So I'm going to make another check to see if I can find my way away from the river. This time I get a 4, so now finally I am in the swamp hex. Ideally, I'd really like to move here and get into that clear space, but I don't dare try to cross another river while I'm leaving the swamp. Let me show you the terrain events table. This actually lists for all of the different kinds of terrain, and it tells me that at a swamp I get lost on a 5 plus, and there's an event on a 10 plus. So we check to see if something happened. I got a 9, nothing happened, so I burn my last food, and it is now the 6th day. Once again, I'm out of food. I want to get out of the swamp, so I'm going to try to move to the forest one more time. I get a 7. He's lost again. Does anything happen? We roll to see. I got an 8. Nothing happens. Combat goes down by 1, so I'm back down to a 7 combat skill. Gonna try to get out again. Got a 7. I am still lost. Now, the good news is not a whole lot happens in the swamp. Oh, I got an 11. I spoke too soon. So to find out what happens, we kick back over to our travel table. This time we're going to roll 2d6. 1 and 2. So I got a 1 and a 4, and that means I encounter a dwarf. Now, this E006 that you see here actually refers to the second of 2 books. You get a rule book, and you get an event book. The event book, when we flip over to E006 to see what the deal is with this dwarf that we encountered, well, he's got a combat skill of 6. Remember, we've been starving for 2 days. Our combat skill is now a 6 as well. He's got an endurance of 7 and a wealth of 21. So first we got to decide whether we're going to talk, evade, or fight. In this case, we got to talk to the guy. We're hurting here. Hopefully we can find an ally. Then before rolling a die to resolve the option, first roll 1 die to see if he's alone or accompanied by friends. And according to this, he has 1 friend. So we got a dwarf and his pal. I'd love to give these guys names, but I don't have any names yet. Anybody that comments on this particular video, I'd love to throw you in. You'll be in the next run through of this. I'll name somebody after you. So, dwarf and his buddy. And once again, all you got to do is roll a d6 and consult the table. The dwarf is surprised. That kicks us over to R308. We roll a d6. If your wit exceeds the roll, which it does, I sense danger, which means I strike first in combat. I want to fight these guys. Doesn't look like I have much choice. So, we get a dwarf. Oh, and actually, now that you mention it, I just so happen to have a couple of dwarf miniatures. So what I'm going to do to help me keep track of everything that's going on here is assign a couple of figures. Again, I got a couple of 10mm Pendraken miniatures, and we'll set one there and one there. As you gather companions, there's a chance these guys become my buddies, in which case you can have travel companions. You got to feed them, but they'll help fight with you. Some of these combats can get pretty elaborate, so it's a good idea to have a little battle mat laid out. Perhaps not in this, but we're going to do it anyway just so that we get comfortable with the whole notion. And as you remember, we had a dwarf for the combat of 6, an endurance of 7, and his old buddy has a combat skill of 5, and an endurance of 6. And unfortunately, old Cal blundered into them, and before he knew what was happening, this dwarf attacked him. For combat, it's a simple matter of figuring out who's got the better combat skill. Since he's attacking and we both have a combat of 6, again, remember I've been starving for 2 days. He rolls 2d6, gets a 3, compares it to a table, and that 3 means that he does 1 wound. Cal is down to 8 hits. In this case, he's going to roll 2d6. subtract 1, and he gets a total of 1, and that 1 means nothing happens. Now, that was the surprise round. Then they also get the first attack of the combat, which means he's going to roll again. A 9. On the combat chart, that means nothing happens. This guy's got a -1. A 5 means old Cal takes a second wound. Now he's down to 7. But at least Cal gets to take a stab at one of these guys. Again, Cal is rolling even against this guy. So that's 1 wound to him. So he's now down to 6. And then they attack Cal. 5. Does another wound to Cal. He attacks. There's another wound. So as you can see, this is a pretty deadly game. Probably wasn't a good idea to start blundering around in the swamp. That 3 is an attack on this guy. He's down to 5 wounds. They attack Cal. An 11 is 1 more wound. His friend rolls a 6. Minus the 1 is 5. That's another wound. And now Cal is wounded. That means he has a +2 to his roll. Oh, Striker has 1 more wound. So everybody gets a -1 at this point. He gets a -1 too when he tries to attack. So that 2 means nothing happens. He gets a +2 to his roll. So a 12 means he does 2 wounds, and old Cal is knocked unconscious. When you are knocked unconscious, if you have any friends, they can save your life, but I don't have any friends at this point. Man, art imitates life once again, which means, unfortunately, Cal Arath has met his demise after traveling 1 hex. What can I say? I'm just not a very good Barbarian Prince. So that's first run through, kind of gives you the basics. There's a whole lot more involved with this game. I think I got some pretty bad rolls at the outset. I'm stupid. I started at a bad hex. There's not a whole lot you can do with that. It's a challenging game. Stick around. We'll try it again sometime later. Thanks for watching, and as I said, if you want to be included, if you'd like to be one of Cal Arath's companions, just give me a shout. I'll throw you in the next one.